The light in the great hall flickered once, then twice, then died completely. The melodic chimes, which had been playing a serene symphony moments before, abruptly ceased, swallowed by a sudden, echoing silence. It was followed immediately by chaos. Kaelen Vane, all 6 feet 3 inches of him, earth-born and decidedly not accustomed to navigating city-sized structures suspended amongst the clouds, found himself in an utterly undignified position. He was face first in what felt like a pile of shattered glass, but which, he quickly realized, was something far stranger. Shimmering fragments. That's what they were. Millions of tiny, iridescent pieces that seemed to pulse with an inner light, reflecting the dying embers of the hall's illumination in a kaleidoscope of impossible colors. They stuck to his skin, his clothing, even seemed to cling to the very air around him. "The crystal!" a voice screeched, high-pitched and laced with a barely contained fury. "He's desecrated the prophecy crystal!" Kaelen tried to lift his head, but the shards, or whatever they were, clung tenaciously. He spat out a mouthful of the glittering substance, coughing. "Desecrated? Look, I tripped! This place is a death trap for anyone who isn't floaty!" His words were lost in the growing commotion. He finally managed to push himself upright, wincing. His vision swam, and a sharp pain throbbed at his temple. He vaguely registered the sight of figures moving around him, their faces obscured by the gloom. But one figure stood out. Lyra Nyssa. She was everything Kaelen wasn't, graceful, ethereal, and utterly alien. Her silver hair, woven with strands of shimmering luminescent thread, cascaded down her back like a frozen waterfall. Her skin, the color of polished alabaster, seemed to absorb the remaining light, making her features appear sharper, almost sculpted. And her eyes were the most striking thing about her. They were a deep, almost violet blue, and they burned with an intensity that could melt steel. At the moment, that intensity was directed squarely at him. Behind her, Kaelen could just make out the ranks of the royal guard, their polished armor glinting in the dim light. They stood at attention, their faces impassive, but he could sense the tension radiating from them like heat from a furnace. Elysium Prime, the city in the clouds, had suddenly become a very dangerous place. "Explain yourself," Lyra said, her voice cold and precise. It was a voice used to command, to be obeyed without question. "What possessed you to commit such an act of sacrilege?" Kaelen winced again, rubbing his temple. "Sacrilege? Seriously? I told you I tripped. Your gravity here is weird. And those things, those flying food trays? Lethal." He gestured vaguely towards the wreckage of what he now recognized as an elaborate, hovering serving platform, littered with half-eaten pastries and strange, gelatinous concoctions. Lyra's expression didn't soften. "This is no laughing matter, Earthling. You have insulted the very foundation of our civilization. The prophecy crystal is sacred. It is the source of our foresight, our guidance, our very being." Kaelen sighed. This was going to be a long night. He took a tentative step forward, brushing more of the shimmering fragments from his clothes. "Look, Princess, I get it. It's important to you. But I'm telling you, it was an accident. I didn't mean any disrespect." He paused, trying to find the right words. This wasn't Earth. There were no easy apologies, no lawyers to smooth things over. Here, in this glittering, gravity-defying city, he was a stranger in a very strange land. And he just managed to offend the most powerful person in it. "Maybe," he ventured, "if you could just show me around a bit? Explain things? I'm still trying to figure out which fork to use, let alone how to avoid destroying your priceless artifacts." Lyra stared at him, her violet eyes narrowed. He could see the anger simmering beneath the surface, but also something else, something that looked almost like frustration. "You misunderstand, Kaelen Vane," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "This is not a matter of etiquette. You have shattered the crystal. You have broken our connection to the past, to the future. You have jeopardized the very survival of Elysium." The gravity of her words, combined with the throbbing in his head, made Kaelen's stomach clench. He suddenly realized that this wasn't just about a clumsy Earthling making a social faux pas. This was something much, much bigger. The Great Hall was silent now, save for the soft hum of the atmospheric regulators that kept Elysium Prime afloat. The royal guard remained motionless, statues carved from polished metal. Even the tiny, bioluminescent insects that usually flitted through the air seemed to have retreated, sensing the tension. Lyra turned away from Kaelen, her gaze sweeping across the assembled dignitaries. He saw a flicker of fear in her eyes, quickly masked by her regal composure. They were high senators and counselors, all beings with an important standing in Elysium Prime's society. "The council will convene," she announced, her voice echoing through the hall. "We will determine the appropriate course of action." A murmur rippled through the assembled dignitaries. Kaelen saw faces etched with concern, anger, and something that looked suspiciously like disappointment. One figure in particular caught his attention. A tall, gaunt alien with skin the color of dried parchment, and eyes like chips of obsidian. He wore the flowing robes of a high senator, and an ornate, gravity-defying headpiece that seemed to defy the very laws of physics. He was staring at Kaelen with an expression of undisguised contempt. Kaelen felt a shiver run down his spine. He didn't know who this guy was, but he knew he didn't like him. "Senator Mordeth," Lyra said, turning back to the Earthling, almost as if she were attempting to gauge what he knew. "Accompany the royal guard." Two of the armored figures stepped forward, their energy weapons humming softly. Kaelen hesitated, then nodded. He didn't have much of a choice. As they led him away, he risked a glance back at Lyra. Her expression was unreadable. He couldn't tell if she was angry, worried, or simply resigned to whatever fate awaited him. He followed the guards through the sprawling corridors of the Great Hall, each step echoing in the oppressive silence. The architecture was breathtaking, a fusion of organic forms and advanced technology. Towering arches carved from living crystal led to vast, open spaces filled with shimmering fountains and gravity-defying gardens. But Kaelen was in no mood to appreciate the beauty. He was too busy wondering what was going to happen to him. "Where are you taking me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The guards didn't answer. They simply continued to march forward, their movements precise and mechanical. Finally, they reached a large, circular chamber. The walls were lined with glowing panels that pulsed with an inner light. In the center of the room stood a single, imposing structure, a tall, cylindrical pillar made from the same shimmering material as the prophecy crystal. "Wait here," one of the guards said, his voice distorted by his helmet. The guards deactivated their energy weapons and took up positions on either side of the entrance. Kaelen was alone. He looked around the chamber, his heart pounding in his chest. The air hummed with an almost palpable energy. He could feel the weight of history in this place, the echoes of countless ceremonies and pronouncements. What was this place? And what were they going to do to him? He reached out and touched the surface of the pillar. It was cool and smooth to the touch, and seemed to vibrate with a subtle, almost imperceptible energy. Suddenly, a voice echoed in his mind. "You do not belong here." Kaelen recoiled, stumbling backward. He looked around wildly, but there was no one else in the chamber. "This world is not yours." The voice was inside his head, clear as a bell. It was cold, ancient, and filled with an unyielding hatred. He clutched his head, trying to shut out the voice, but it was no use. It was relentless, pounding against his mind like a hammer. "Leave. Before it is too late." Kaelen sank to his knees, his body trembling. He didn't understand what was happening, but he knew one thing: he was in serious trouble. Lyra watched as the guards led Kaelen away, her heart heavy with a mixture of anger, fear, and a strange, unfamiliar guilt. She knew that what he had done was a terrible offense. The prophecy crystal was more than just a religious relic. It was the key to Elysium's survival, the source of their unique ability to foresee the future. Without it, they were vulnerable, exposed to the dangers of the galaxy. But she also knew that Kaelen was an alien to this world, a stranger who had stumbled into a situation he didn't understand. And she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than met the eye. "Senator Mordeth." The royal guard, and others, looked for their commands from him most of all. He was a master manipulator, with a network of spies and informants that stretched throughout Elysium. She didn't trust him. She turned to address the assembled dignitaries, her voice echoing through the great hall. "The council will convene immediately. We must assess the damage to the crystal and determine the appropriate response." The senators and councilors murmured their assent. They were a diverse group, representing the various factions and interests that made up Elysium society. Some were pragmatic and reasonable, others were rigid and conservative, and some were simply power-hungry and ambitious. Lyra knew that she had a difficult task ahead of her. She had to convince them that Kaelen's actions were not a deliberate act of sabotage, but a simple accident. And she had to convince them that the prophecy crystal could be repaired, that Elysium's future was not irrevocably shattered. But first, she had to find out the truth. She dismissed the dignitaries and made her way to the royal archives, a vast repository of knowledge that contained the history of Elysium from its earliest days. The archives were a labyrinth of towering shelves filled with ancient scrolls, crystal tablets, and holographic projections. Lyra knew the archives well. She had spent countless hours here as a child, poring over the stories of her ancestors and learning about the traditions of her people. She navigated the labyrinthine corridors with ease, her mind focused on her task. She needed to find the records of the prophecy crystal, to understand its history, its powers, and its weaknesses. She reached a secluded alcove, hidden behind a towering stack of crystal tablets. This was where the most sensitive information was stored, the secrets that Elysium was not ready to share with the rest of the galaxy. Lyra activated a hidden panel, revealing a holographic display. The display flickered to life, showing an image of the prophecy crystal in its original form, a massive, shimmering structure that towered over the great hall. Lyra tapped a series of commands, bringing up the historical records of the crystal. She scrolled through the data, her eyes scanning for anything that might shed light on the current situation. She found records of previous incidents involving the crystal, of minor fractures and disruptions that had been repaired without incident. But she also found something else, something that made her blood run cold. A record of a catastrophic event that had occurred centuries ago, an event that had nearly destroyed Elysium. The event was known as the Sundering. According to the records, a rogue faction had attempted to harness the power of the prophecy crystal for their own selfish purposes. Their actions had triggered a chain reaction that had shattered the crystal and plunged Elysium into chaos. The records were vague on the details, but they made one thing clear: the Sundering had been a disaster of unimaginable proportions. It had taken generations to repair the damage and restore the crystal to its former glory. Lyra stared at the holographic display, her mind racing. Was it possible that Kaelen's actions had triggered a similar event? Was Elysium about to face another Sundering? She knew that she had to act quickly. She had to find a way to repair the crystal and prevent another catastrophe. But she also knew that she couldn't do it alone. She needed help, someone she could trust, someone who understood the true nature of the threat. And she knew just who to turn to. Kaelen paced the chamber, his anxiety growing with each passing minute. The voice in his head had fallen silent, but its chilling message lingered. He didn't belong here. This world wasn't his. He should leave. But where would he go? He was stranded on Elysium Prime, millions of miles from Earth, with no way to get home. And even if he could get home, what would he tell them? That he had offended a powerful alien princess and nearly destroyed her world? He shuddered. He was a historian, not a hero. He was more comfortable in a library than in a galactic crisis. Suddenly, the chamber door hissed open. Kaelen tensed, ready to defend himself, but his apprehension subsided when he saw who it was. Lyra. She was alone, without her guards. Her face was pale, and her eyes were filled with a mixture of determination and fear. "Kaelen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need your help." Kaelen stared at her in disbelief. "My help? After what happened? I thought you wanted to throw me in the deepest dungeon." Lyra shook her head. "There isn't time for recriminations. What you have done to the crystal has awoken something terrible, something from the past. The voice, Kaelen responded. It said I don't belong here. Lyra nodded. It's an echo of the Sundering, a cataclysm that nearly destroyed Elysium in the past. The Sundering? Centuries ago, a group attempted to manipulate the crystal, to draw more power from it than it could safely give. They shattered it and nearly obliterated Elysium. Lyra continued to explain about the state of the crystal. The risk that they had been exposed to was that the destruction of the crystal not only had taken away their ability to look into the future, but also had awakened echoes from the past that could spell death. Lyra and Kaelen spoke at length for a couple of hours, before finally deciding to break out and explore the archives and discover more about what the Sundering really meant. That is, once they had managed to escape their various guards and the watchful eye of Mordeth. Defiled? Kaelen echoed, his voice rising slightly in disbelief. Defiled is a pretty strong word for tripping over a floating dessert tray. With all due respect, Princess, I think you're overreacting a little. Lyra's violet eyes flashed. Overreacting? You shattered an artifact of immense cultural and spiritual significance. An artifact that has guided our people for millennia. You dare to call that an overreaction? She took a step closer, her voice tight with barely suppressed anger. Do you even understand what you've done, Earthling? Do you have any comprehension of the impact your actions will have on our world? Kaelen held up his hands in a gesture of appeasement. Look, I get it. It's important. But I'm telling you, it was an accident. I didn't do it on purpose. I didn't even know what that thing was until I was wearing it as a face mask. He paused, trying to find the right words. Maybe if you could just explain things to me a little better? I'm kind of operating in the dark here. I'm not exactly fluent in Elysian customs, you know? Lyra crossed her arms, her expression skeptical. Elysian customs are not the issue here, Kaelen Vane. Respect is the issue. Reverence is the issue. You have shown either. Respect? I'm trying to be respectful, Kaelen exclaimed, his frustration mounting. But it's kind of hard to be respectful when I don't even know what the rules are. I'm from Earth, Princess. We don't have floating cities or prophecy crystals. We have a lot of really bad reality TV, if that makes you feel any better. Lyra's lips twitched slightly, but she quickly suppressed any sign of amusement. This is not a matter for levity, Kaelen Vane. I know, Kaelen sighed, running a hand through his hair. But it's hard to take all this seriously when I'm still trying to figure out how to use your gravity-defying toilets. Lyra's eyes widened slightly. Our toilets? Yeah, the ones that flush upwards, Kaelen explained, his voice laced with exasperation. Seriously, who came up with that design? It's a recipe for disaster, I tell you. Lyra stared at him, her mind clearly struggling to process this bizarre tangent. This is irrelevant, she finally said, her voice strained. We are talking about the fate of Elysium, not the functionality of our sanitation systems. But it's all connected, Princess, Kaelen insisted. It's all part of the same problem. I'm a fish out of water here. I don't understand your customs, your technology, or even your basic plumbing. And until I do, I'm going to keep making mistakes. Big, messy, prophecy crystal-shattering mistakes. Lyra was silent for a moment, her violet eyes fixed on Kaelen's. He could see a flicker of something in them, something that looked almost like understanding? Perhaps, she said slowly. You have a point. A point? Kaelen repeated, his eyebrows raised in surprise. You mean you're actually admitting that I might not be entirely to blame for this mess? Lyra hesitated. I am admitting that there is a cultural divide between us, a lack of understanding that may have contributed to the incident. Contributed? Kaelen scoffed. That's putting it mildly. I'm pretty sure that if I'd known that thing was a sacred artifact, I wouldn't have used it as a makeshift landing pad. Lyra sighed. Very well. I concede that your ignorance played a role in what happened. But that does not excuse your disrespect. Disrespect? Kaelen protested. I wasn't trying to be disrespectful. I was just being myself. Which, apparently, is a major offense in Elysium. Your self is different, Lyra said delicately. Your customs, your attitudes, your entire way of being is foreign to us. And vice versa, Kaelen pointed out. I'm pretty sure that everything about Elysium is foreign to me. I mean, flying cities? Teleportation? Clothes made of living crystal? It's all a bit much to take in, you know? Lyra nodded slowly. I suppose it is. We have been isolated from the rest of the galaxy for centuries. We have developed our own unique culture, our own way of life. And I just barged in and shattered it all, Kaelen said glumly. Not all, Lyra corrected. But you have certainly caused a disruption. She paused, then added, perhaps if I were to explain some of our customs, some of our traditions, you would have a better understanding of what you have done. That would be great, Kaelen said eagerly. I'm a fast learner, I promise. Just try to avoid using too much jargon. I'm still trying to figure out what a gravitic resonator is, and I'm not sure my brain can handle any more technical terms. Lyra smiled faintly. Very well. I will endeavor to speak in terms that you can understand. But first, there is something else you must know. She hesitated again, her eyes filled with a deep sadness. The prophecy crystal, it is more than just a cultural artifact. It is connected to our very souls. It is through the crystal that we receive guidance from our ancestors, that we foresee the future. It is the source of our strength, our wisdom, our very identity. Kaelen stared at her, his expression sobering. He was beginning to understand the true gravity of the situation. He hadn't just shattered a pretty piece of crystal. He had broken a fundamental connection between the Elysian people and their past, their present, and their future. I didn't know, he stammered. I swear if I had known. It does not matter what you knew, Lyra said, her voice cold again. What matters is what you have done. And what you have done is irreparable. The silence in the chamber hung heavy, punctuated only by the soft hum of the atmospheric regulators. Kaelen felt the weight of Lyra's words pressing down on him, crushing him with guilt and remorse. Is there anything I can do? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Anything at all to fix this? Lyra shook her head. I do not know. The prophecy crystal has been shattered. The damage is extensive. I am not sure it can be repaired. But you said there was a way, Kaelen insisted. You said there was a cataclysm in the past, a sundering that nearly destroyed Elysium. You said they fixed it then. How did they do it? Lyra hesitated. The sundering was a different situation. The damage was caused by deliberate malice, not by accidental clumsiness. And the methods they used to repair the crystal were extreme. Extreme how? Kaelen pressed. Lyra was silent for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the shimmering fragments of the prophecy crystal that still clung to Kaelen's clothes. They used a ritual, she said finally, her voice strained. A ritual that involved the sacrifice of a life force. Kaelen stared at her, his blood running cold. Sacrifice? You mean they killed someone? Lyra nodded slowly. Yes. They sacrificed a volunteer, a member of the royal family who was willing to give their life to save Elysium. Kaelen recoiled in horror. You're telling me that you're considering sacrificing someone to fix this? Someone innocent? Because of what I did. It is not a decision I would take lightly, Lyra said quickly. I am merely exploring all possible options. There may be other ways to repair the crystal, ways that do not involve such drastic measures. There has to be, Kaelen insisted. There has to be a better way than killing someone. We're talking about the 23rd century, right? We have spaceships and teleportation and clothes made of living crystal. Surely we can figure out how to fix a broken piece of rock without resorting to human sacrifice. Lyra sighed. You do not understand the nature of the crystal, Kaelen Vane. It is not just a piece of rock. It is a living entity, a sentient being. It is connected to our very souls. And the damage it has sustained is not merely physical. It is spiritual. She paused, then added, "But I agree with you. I do not want to resort to such drastic measures. I will explore every other possible option before I even consider such a thing." "Good," Kaelen said firmly. "Because if you even think about sacrificing someone, I'm going to. I don't know what I'm going to do, but it won't be pretty." Lyra looked at him, a flicker of amusement in her eyes. "I believe you," she said. With a shared, if uneasy, understanding, Lyra and Kaelen began to discuss the steps they would take to try and resolve the issue. First, they needed to learn more about the sundering, and what methods were used back then. Lyra knew the basics, but the complete information was only available in the archives. Before they could go, they knew it was important to make sure they were away from the prying eyes of the Council, including Senator Mordeth. "The guards are outside the door, and I'm pretty sure they are going to keep me here at his request." Lyra sighed. "I think they are trying to get me to follow their lead." Kaelen thought for a moment, as the two stood in silence, looking at each other. Then suddenly an idea popped into his mind. "What about the floating food trays?" Kaelen blurted out. Lyra stared at him, her expression puzzled. "The food trays? What about them? You said they're automated, right? They can fly around on their own?" Lyra nodded slowly. "Yes. They are equipped with gravitic regulators and pre-programmed routes." "Why? Couldn't we use one to get out of here? If we could reprogram it to take us to the archives, we could sneak out without anyone seeing us." Lyra's eyes widened. "That's actually a rather clever idea. But how would we reprogram it? I don't know the first thing about their programming." "Leave that to me," Kaelen said with a grin. "I may not know much about prophecy crystals, but I know a thing or two about computers. And I'm willing to bet that your fancy floating food trays run on something that's at least vaguely similar to Earth technology." Lyra considered the plan for a moment, then nodded decisively. "Very well. Let's do it." The two of them quietly left the room and began to make their way to the main kitchen where Lyra said the trays were kept. Once they had made their way into the kitchen, they were surprised to see no one was there. Lyra suddenly smiled, a rare occurrence. "This is great. It means we can get the codes and get moving a bit easier." Kaelen stood and looked around. It was a sight to behold. Everywhere he looked were complex tools that he didn't understand. "Well, where are the codes?" Kaelen asked, breaking the silence and bringing the princess's attention back to what they were meant to be doing. "Over here, in this panel," Lyra said as she walked across to the far side of the room, to a well-hidden panel that was covered in symbols. As the princess started the process, the door behind Kaelen burst open. "Senator Mordeth. I thought that this plan was too ridiculous to work. It seems I was wrong. Seize him." Several guards ran into the room, all wielding weapons. Kaelen braced himself for a fight, but Lyra quickly stepped in front of him, her hand raised in a gesture of authority. "Stand down," she commanded, her voice echoing through the kitchen. "By order of the Crown Princess, you will not interfere." The guards hesitated, their eyes darting between Lyra and Senator Mordeth. Mordeth's face twisted in anger. "You would defy the Council, Princess? You would protect this Earthling, after what he has done?" "I am not protecting him," Lyra said coldly. "I am merely ensuring that he is brought to justice in a fair and impartial manner. And that requires gathering all the facts, which is what we are doing here." "You are wasting time," Mordeth snarled. "Every moment we delay, the damage to the prophecy crystal grows worse. We must act now, before it is too late." "We are acting," Lyra insisted. "We are searching for a solution that does not involve the sacrifice of innocent lives. A solution that will preserve the integrity of Elysium." Mordeth glared at her, his eyes narrowed. "You are naive, Princess. You believe that there is always a peaceful solution to every problem. But sometimes force is necessary. Sometimes sacrifice is required." "I refuse to believe that," Lyra said firmly. "I will not allow you to turn Elysium into a blood-soaked tyranny." Mordeth chuckled darkly. You think I desire power for its own sake? You think I revel in violence and oppression? You are wrong, Princess. I only want what is best for Elysium. And sometimes, what is best requires making difficult choices. Choices that you are not willing to make? Lyra challenged. Mordeth was silent for a moment, his eyes filled with a strange, unsettling light. Perhaps, he said finally, perhaps I am not as squeamish as you are. But I assure you, Princess, I am willing to do whatever it takes to protect our world. He turned to the guards. Seize them both. This time, the guards did not hesitate. They surged forward, their weapons raised. Lyra drew her own weapon, a sleek, silver energy pistol. She fired a quick burst, disabling one of the guards. Kaelen, caught off guard, stumbled backward, narrowly avoiding a blast from another guard's weapon. Run! Lyra shouted, firing another shot. I'll hold them off. Kaelen didn't need to be told twice. He sprinted towards the back of the kitchen, dodging and weaving between the automated food trays. He could hear the sounds of the fight behind him, the crackle of energy weapons, the shouts of the guards. He reached the programming panel just as Lyra let out a cry of pain. He glanced back and saw her being overwhelmed by the guards. Lyra! He shouted, his heart pounding in his chest. He hesitated for a moment, torn between his desire to help her and his need to escape. But he knew that if he stayed, they would both be captured. And then all hope of repairing the crystal would be lost. With a heavy heart, he turned back to the programming panel and began to frantically input the codes that Lyra had partially prepared before the senator had arrived. He was pretty sure they would get him to the archives. The codes were successfully installed and Kaelen leapt onto the food tray as it started to leave the kitchen at a rapid speed. He looked back to see Senator Mordeth dragging Lyra out of the room. He didn't know what was to happen to her. He had to focus. The journey to the archives didn't take too long. It was still a while away, but with the speed the tray was going they were there in no time. When he arrived, he fell off, landing on the floor, with a thud. It hurt. He was really starting to dislike this planet. He got up to his feet and started to run inside. Hopefully with the codes Lyra had given him he could get inside. The door was code-locked, like many on the planet. He typed it in and with a satisfying click, the door opened. He ran inside and was immediately faced with what he expected, many rows of books and tomes as far as he could see. He stood and pondered. He had to find information about the Sundering, and how the people of the time had resolved it. The Elysium Senate Chamber was a breathtaking sight, a testament to the ingenuity and artistry of the Elysian people. A vast, circular arena carved from living crystal, it shimmered with an ethereal light that pulsed with the rhythm of the city's energy grid. Tiered platforms, each supporting a dozen or so floating seats, ascended towards a central dome, creating a sense of both grandeur and intimacy. But today, the beauty of the chamber was overshadowed by a palpable sense of tension. Every seat was occupied, every senator present, their faces a mask of concern, indignation, and, in some cases, outright hostility.